Jonathan took the bridle in his hand and started walking, watching his firstborn, seeing how she kept her balance, pushing on her knee to show her how to sit properly. He thought it was funny how the girls always took to riding so readily. After a few turns, he handed the reins to his baby girl and let her smile warm his heart. She was getting the handle of it already, shifting in the old western saddle, gliding along with the horse's movements. He saw the change in the horse, a settling. She knew her handler was comfortable, and that made everything right. "Your turn," he asked Susan. "Me? Are you crazy?" she asked. "Come on, Susan. Lighten up a little. Try it." With only a little goading, he had her up in a saddle, explaining things. She was nervous, far more nervous than Cindy had ever been. His daughter seemed like she lived in the saddle already. She steered her horse up alongside her mother, talking to her, laughing, until Susan relaxed enough to move along at more than a crawl. Jonathan slipped his foot into the stirrup and hauled himself up on the big gray. With a cluck, a pat on the neck, and a press of the heels, he took off at a trot, easing back to a gentle walk when he was beside his two girls. "Not so bad, is it? You do this for hours and hours each day?" Susan asked. "Sometimes. Every day is different. There's times I rarely get out of the garage." "You like this?" she asked. "I love it." He looked over at his daughter, seeing the energy, the desire to do more, trot, gallop, become one with her horse. He chided himself for not getting her riding earlier. They were ranchers. 5 generations now. It was in their blood. He'd been a fool to deny it. Rich sat up in bed, listening. There, the crying, the sobbing, he thought. It stopped. He closed his eyes, willing himself to sleep. Unsuccessfully. When the soft crying started again, he pulled the pillow over his head, trying to block it out. "I'm sorry," he wept. Outside, John took another sip of the tepid coffee. One more hour and his shift would end. He adjusted the earphones and listened to the scumsuckers whining. He pressed the remote control, starting recording 3, the sound of a fire burning. It was an accident. He heard, screaming. He'd give the scumsucker 5 minutes and hit him with number 1, the miserable crying. That was a tough one. It sometimes gave him goosebumps, and he knew it was Diane on the recording. "Jonathan." He reached over and put his arm around his wife's waist. "Yes, baby. I need some money. I'm almost out of gas." Jonathan pulled his hand away abruptly. "Get it from Loverboy, please. I have an interview down at Jenkins's Hardware." "I didn't know you were looking for a job," he said. "I'm worried about our finances. Nancy can start kindergarten this year, and I can work while the kids are in school. You're not going to use the money to go see Loverboy, are you?" "No, Jonathan. I promise. It's for gas so I can go on the interview and take care of our children. What if there was an emergency? I'm on empty." He pulled out his wallet and gave her 2 20s. "I trust you. Please don't make a fool out of me." "I wouldn't do that. I love you." "You've done it before," Jonathan said coldly. She bowed her head. Why wouldn't Rich return her calls? Was he really seeing someone else? That picture of the 304 from his old office coming out of his house. Him hugging her. Had he replaced her that quickly? They hadn't spoken in over a week. I'm sorry." Jonathan looked at his paycheck. The 50% he received directly was barely a third of what he'd earned at this old job. It wouldn't even have been that much if Uncle Lynn hadn't given him a raise when he took over maintenance of all the ranch vehicles. With the money that his grandfather secretly received, it wasn't much less than he'd earned previously, before the overtime. Uncle Lynn was talking about him getting a share of the profits if he'd stay with the ranch. It was only 1% a year for the first 5 years, but that could be a nice little bonus. He'd be a partner. A minor one, but there was a certain pride that came with that. He'd never be a majority owner that would fall on Lynn's oldest, although so far Will hadn't shown an interest in taking over the family business. It was the way they did things. But his mother got 10% of the business profits, and if he stuck with it, that could be his one day as well. He hitched up his pants, thinking he'd have to buy some new ones soon. Second time he had to replace them. He didn't know what size his waist was, but he'd had to punch 2 new notches in his belt. All this field work was changing him. He joined the rest of the regular workers in a payday drink at the Spur and Saddle. Mikey, the giant of a man with the juvenile name, jabbed him in the ribs. "That filly seems to have her eye on you." Jonathan looked over at the table where 3 women were seated. The cute little redhead was definitely giving him the eye. He got the bartender's attention. "What are they drinking?" he asked, with a nod at the table. "Pitcher of Shiner." "I'll take one." The old bartender gave him a nod and a wink and placed the pitcher in front of him. He walked over to the table and stood beside the empty chair, offering in hand. "Just so you know, I'm not Greek." The girls looked at each other in confusion until a smile popped up on the redhead's face. "And you're bearing gifts?" she asked. He gave her a wink, put the pitcher on the table, lifted the old one, topped off their glasses, and returned with it to the bar. The blonde was tapping him on the shoulder a minute later. "You're kidding, right? You're not even going to join us for a beer?" "I've sworn off beer," he explained. She gave a glance at his glass. Jonathan grinned. "Haven't sworn off Jim Beam yet. So bring your Jim Beam over and keep us company." It was an enjoyable hour, well spent, with pretty girls. He got 2 phone numbers out of it and 3 hugs, one with a nice little kiss. Maybe Grandpa was right. It was the easiest thing in the world. Susan's life was turning to shit. She was the laughingstock of the town, ridiculed and insulted everywhere she turned. She had given up getting her fancy coffees and resorted to Dunkin' Donuts. It was all she could afford. She was waiting at the drive-thru when the old man brought her the coffee. He took one look at her and turned away from the window, walking around the corner for a second before returning with a smirk on his face. He handed it out the window. "One Cheater's Special," he said, grinning. Her hand was trembling in anger when she took it. She noticed the lid was loose. She didn't want to think about what he'd done to it. She recalled the scene she'd made when complaining at McDonald's about the service. She'd been humiliated and laughed out of the store, the manager laughing as loud as any of them. She glared at the geezer, opened the lid, and poured out the coffee. The scumfucker smiled. "Maybe you're not as stupid as they say." Rich was afraid of plugging his phone in. He never knew when his wife would call again, hounding him, blaming him for her pain and suffering. Logically, he knew it wasn't her. But when he was woken from his sleep, that whispering voice begging him to end the pain, all logic abandoned him. He could feel the eyes on him, everywhere he went, judging him, blaming him, condemning him. It wasn't his fault. Why couldn't they understand? It was an accident. The little notes were the worst. Tiny reminders in her careful handwriting. "Remember that little bar? Do you still have that dress? The one I wore for our anniversary? Cancun, Richie, remember Cancun? Why, Richie? Why?" Yes, he remembered it all. He opened the albums that Susan had hidden away, stealing his memories. How beautiful Heather had looked at the rail of the ship, hiking through the ruins. God, how he'd loved her. And now she was dead. His fault. He took another drink from the bottle, feeling the burn down his throat. She'd trusted him, and he'd failed her. He never meant to. It was an accident, love, he mumbled, tears falling onto the pictures. Max, the judge, the colonel, and John sat going over their notes. The colonel had his map out, colored dots showing each encounter over the last month. "Think he's gonna run soon?" "Hardly ever out in public anymore," John Crumb asked, looking over the latest entries. "He'll break long before she does." "Stubborn she is," Max said. There was a hint of admiration in his statement. "Maybe we should dial it back. Give them both some time to realize how bad they've got it," the judge asked. "Hell no," Max snapped. "She wants to be stubborn. We'll crank it up." The judge shook his head. "Judith's not going to be happy about this," he muttered. The others laughed. 52 years and you're still kitty-whipped?" John teased. "Least I'm still getting some," he said. "How's Rosie doing?" "All right, enough," the colonel said. "We got some calls to make. Take it up a notch." "Per scumpsucker." Susan wiped her face in shock. That old woman had spit on her. Spit in her face. She was sitting outside the coffee shop, where they used to meet. It has been almost 2 weeks since she'd heard from him. She'd even gotten up the courage to go to his house, but he hadn't answered her knock. His car was there. He must have been around. She used her key and opened the door, but it was chained. "Rich," she'd called out. "Rich, honey? It's me." No reply. The place had a sour smell to it. It looked dark. Maybe he was gone. Gone with that 304 from the picture. Driving her car. How could he do that to her? What had she done wrong? She'd strolled down memory lane, going back to their coffee shop, where they'd had those long, wonderful chats. She'd been sitting there, remembering his voice, his touch, lost in her recollections. "Tramp," the woman had hissed, walking by on the sidewalk, just beyond the railing surrounding the drinking area. Susan had looked up just in time to feel the spittle land on her face. She had been in shock. She heard the whispers around her, the open laughter. She wiped her face with her napkin, tears trailing down her cheeks. How had her life turned to shit so quickly? She'd had it all. A loving family, a good man, a young love, great sex. Now, all she had were memories and the hate of everyone she knew. It wasn't fair. What had she done wrong? She couldn't help it. She never had wanted it, never sought it out. It was love. Undeniable. It wasn't her fault. She looked up when a college-aged kid sat down across from her. He grinned, cheekily. Pretty lady, like you shouldn't be crying. What do you say I buy you a drink? She shook her head. No thanks, I'm married. He shrugged. Never heard that stopped you before. Come on, we'll get a drink or two, have a little fun. You're sure pretty. Fun? Is that all she was now? Please, leave me alone, she said. He stood and leaned over. You change your mind, we'll be over at the Spur and Saddle. You ever been with 3 guys? We'll keep you going all night. Leave me alone, she shrieked at him. Geez, lady, don't have a cow. Just figured a party girl might like to party. No hard feelings, all right? She lowered her face into her hands and didn't fight the tears. Jonathan watched his grandfather place the rope in his son's hands, showing him how to hold the loop open, how far down to hold the 2 ropes parallel, a foot or so from the Honda, the eye of the lariat, explaining how to coil it properly, how to hold your offhand. The pole sticking up out of the bale of hay was their target. It was his 3rd try, swinging the rope at his side, then over his head, learning the timing before casting his arm forward quickly, the loop maintaining its shape as it fell over the pole. Both he and Susan clapped in appreciation, as did Cindy. Little Nancy was too busy rolling around with Grandpa's old work dog Blue, a 12-year-old blue heeler. The ranch standard, he never remembered his grandfather not having at least one. They were working dogs and lived outdoors, but he had a soft spot for the suckers, and when they started limping, getting up slowly and awkwardly after setting a spell, he didn't put them down. No, he couldn't do that. They were his friends, and nobody could ever say he wasn't loyal. They moved indoors, got old, fat, and spoiled, lived their days out with their one master, eager for the lightest touch, a single word of praise, always at his side. Their faithfulness rewarded. Grandpa reached down and squeezed Joey's shoulder. Jonathan remembered that touch. How good it made him feel. Sloppy, but it's a start. As close to praise as he'd ever be likely to receive. One day he'd learn to treasure it. He felt Susan lean against him, and he put his arm around her shoulders. He's good with kids. I never would have expected that, she said softly. He always was. Some of the best days of my life were here, with him and Dad. We had some great times, didn't we? She said, her arm reaching around his waist. It was so nice, together as a family, working with the kids, enjoying being outdoors. We did. It's not too late, is it? To have more. As a family. As a husband and wife. He shrugged. I don't know, Susan. I honestly don't know. Rich stood in the reception area, pleading with the woman sitting there. Please, I have to see her. She must have some time in her schedule. The silver-haired woman made a show of checking the calendar. I'm sorry, Mr. Patton. Dr. Schaefer is booked solid. Maybe next week. Oh, I'm sorry. She's on vacation next week. Perhaps the week after that. You really should call ahead. I've tried. You have to get me in. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm sorry, sir. That won't be possible for at least 2 weeks. Would you like to schedule an appointment for then? I can put you down for Thursday at 3:30, week after next. 5 minutes. That's all I need. 5 minutes. Can she at least renew my prescriptions? She's very busy today, trying to get ready for her vacation. Why don't you go home, and I'll talk to her when I can. We'll give you a call if she can squeeze you in tomorrow, before she leaves. Rich nodded slowly and turned to walk out the door, hunched over in defeat. Slink away, you filthy wife stealer, Ellen thought. She picked up the phone and called in the contact. Susan hung up the phone. She didn't know why she even tried. All she got was a busy signal anymore. He couldn't be on the phone that much. Where is he, now that I need him? She thought. She'd sacrificed so much to help him. Her time, her fidelity, her family, maybe even her marriage. She had come running any time he called. Now he was ignoring her. It wasn't fair. What Susan didn't know was that it was a simple matter to block her calls. The last time John Crum was in the scumsucker's house, he picked up the phone, dialed number 60, and maneuvered the menus until both her home phone and cell phone numbers were blocked. Jonathan had done the same thing to their home phone and her cell phone, blocking the scumsucker's incoming calls. It would be a cold day in hell before they'd be calling each other on those phones. Jonathan jerked the reins to the side, heading off the stubborn old cow. He looked for some reason she'd shied away from the gate, instead of following the rest of the herd to the new pasture. She turned and looked to be headed for the scrub, when Vincent, his cattle dog, nipped at her foreleg, turning her. He saw the tentative shifting of weight and figured she might have an injury. It took a good bit to get her where he needed. 2 ropes around her neck, and an hour of battle had her weary to the point where it seemed he might safely approach her. A job better handled by 2, but they were short that day. He could handle it. Miguel found him there, treating the cut on her leg, moving closer slowly. Didn't want to spook her. Dangerous, alone, the old man said. Didn't want her to get into the brush or turn up lame. Thought I'd have it taken care of an hour ago. Inexperienced, I checked over his work before giving a grudging nod. You got this? Yes, sir. I'll have her through the gate within the hour. Lock it up behind you. Jonathan felt a pride in his work he hadn't felt for far too long. His shoulders ached, his hands were rubbed raw, and he would be lucky to get back before dark. He was happier than he had any right to be. He removed the ropes, talking softly, calming the cow. Vincent was laying down a couple of feet away, patiently. He rubbed the young dog's head, praising him for this work. Good boy, Vincent. He smiled, recalling Joey picking out the name. His son thought the dog's hair color, a blue, black, and gray mix, along with a largish light gray spot on his side, looked like Vincent Van Gogh's Starry Night. Jonathan didn't see it, but he was proud the boy even knew who Van Gogh was. Grandpa agreed that Vincent was a better name than Dog. She was wearing a filmy negligee, the outline of her red panties barely visible. She looked nervous as she handed him the drink. Where are the kids? Jonathan asked. With your mother. He lifted an eyebrow. Until morning. Please don't be mad. We need some time alone. He could smell the steak from the broiler. He was starving. Then again, he always was of late. Hard labor does that to a man. She pulled him over to his chair and struggled cutely to get his boots off. She landed on her butt when the second came free, and he had to laugh at the image of her, dressed for play, with his dusty boot in her hand, sitting on the floor with her legs splayed, the tiny red bikini panties on display. She got up and called him to the dinner table. His plate had a large T-bone with a loaded baked potato. Hers had a small fillet and some asparagus. One of the perks of working on a ranch. Plenty of beef, all free. There was a piece of paper above his plate. He picked it up, and she said softly, I'm clean. I haven't seen him since that night. I won't be with him anymore. He stood up and walked around the table, giving her a hug. I'm sorry. I know this is difficult for you. She shook her head. No, don't apologize. I'm sorry. I don't know how it happened. Please forgive me. He picked her up in his arms, and she squealed cutely. The dinner. Jonathan carried her to their bedroom. We'll reheat it. It had been almost 2 months. 2 months since either of them had sex. Jonathan got carried away a little bit, only moments after she'd managed to get his clothes off. She cried out for him. Jonathan leaned over her, staring down into the face of the woman who had betrayed him, choosing another over him for a year. He'd screwed a 304 before. Susan gazed upward into his hard eyes. Forgive me, Jonathan said. Susan walked out of the back door of the ranch, looking for her kids. Her feet ached from standing all day, but she was back with her family now. She saw the group of men gathered in a circle inside the fence. She started rushing forward when she saw there was some kind of fighting going on. Lynn's wife, Grace, was leaning against the fence. She grabbed Susan's arm. Leave him be. What's going on? Susan asked desperately. She spotted her son standing beside Jason Crum, one of the boys in Cindy's class. When Joey turned, she saw her son had a black eye and swollen lip. Strangely, he was grinning. They're learning your boy some lessons on self-defense, Grace explained, hanging onto Susan's tense arm. I don't want him fighting. I don't imagine you want him getting his ass kicked. Susan was surprised to see her daughter Cindy walk out with a tray of drinks. The 10-year-old walked over and stopped in front of her brother, letting him choose first. Then she turned to Jason, blushing as she offered him one. What's this all about? Cindy would sooner kick Joey's bum than wait on him. They fight like cats and dogs. Grace tugged Susan over to the railing, her arm around her waist. He saved her bacon, fought for her, got his little but kicked for it. Susan gasped. He doesn't fight. We don't allow that. Good thing he did today. Couple of boys from school figured that since Cindy was her mother's daughter, she'd be easy, fool around. Caught her behind the bleachers. Had her shirt off before your boy waded into them, little fists flying. That's how Jason tells it. He heard the shouting and found 2 of the little scumsuckers holding Joey down and beating on him. There was no quit in him, though. He kept getting up, going back for more. Jason evened things up. They're just kids. Fighting doesn't solve anything. They should have gone to the teachers. Grace looked at her in disgust. Are you stupid? She'd be soiled goods by now if they went that route. The little a-holes would probably get lectured. Maybe not even that. Sometimes a man's gotta stand up for what's right. Even if he only stands belt high. He could have gotten killed. Doesn't change things. You should be proud of him. Sticking up for family. Protecting his sister like that. The man'll make sure he knows how to hold up his end in a fight. You leave the boy alone now. This is their world. Cindy walked over to where the two of them stood, leaning against the railing, watching. You all right, baby? Susan asked hesitantly. Her daughter replied absent-mindedly, her attention firmly focused on the crowd. Isn't he great, Mama? Her daughter's look of infatuation wasn't lost on her. Who, Cindy? Jason. The way he beat the tar out of those jerks. They'll never mess with me again. Not as long as Jason and Joey are around. Susan didn't hear Max walking up behind her. Hell of a kid you raised, Susan. Whatever else anyone says about you, they can't take that away. You can be proud of your son. I know I am. She watched her boy get off the ground again, brushing his jeans off, while one of the ranch hands lifted his arm up, showing him how to hold it. She wanted to run out there, hug him, hold him, protect him. She watched her little boy kick out with his boot and follow up with a big haymaker. He'd fought to protect his sister. Against older boys, 3-on-1. So much like his father. I am proud of him. Don't let him get hurt, Max. Please. Max laughed. It ain't him you should be worried about. Boy's got sand. No quittin' him whatsoever. Where's my husband? Why isn't he here? Irrigation problem. He probably doesn't even know what's going on yet. He'll be back soon enough. Ranch don't shut down over one little fight. Susan recalled Grace's words about Cindy being her mother's daughter. Easy. Her reputation, making her little girl a target. It wasn't fair. None of it was. Now the kids were suffering for it. Would her nightmare ever end? Oh God, this is going to be a bad one, Officer Banks said, holding a handkerchief up to his nose. His partner reached into his pocket and pulled out the Vicks and rubbed a little under each nostril. He passed the container to the younger guy. The kid would learn. They called out again, getting no reply. The house was a mess, paper scattered, dirty plates in the living room and kitchen. The smell was strongest from the back of the house. They followed it into a bedroom, eyes watering from the stench. Son of a witch. Banks gasped. That's seriously screwed up. The naked man was lying in a pile of photographs, some large, some small. Letters were scattered at his feet. The bottle of vodka, less than half full, and the empty prescription pill containers told them all they needed to know. That and the stench of death. The mirrors in the room had been broken, and they could see the dried blood on the guy's hands where he must have hit them. Never could understand how a man could take his own life over some broad, Officer Gilroy said, shaking his head. He turned to his protege. Call it in. Nothing else for us here. Jonathan sat with the Eagles, all of their gazes turned on him. Figured he'd run. Not take the coward's way out, Grandpa said. Get away from that house and all the memories around here. It wasn't what I wanted. Maybe he really was depressed. Jonathan shrugged. Doesn't bother me. Scumpsucker had it coming. Do you still want to go through with the rest? His grandfather asked. Carl Jenkins spoke up. She's doing a good job at the store. It'll be a shame to let her go. You and the family are all she talks about now. I don't know if it matters, but she sure seems like she loves you. Jonathan nodded. I believe she does, or as much as she can understand the concept. No, this doesn't change anything. She's back now, but who knows when she'll try that shit again. I want to move ahead. Finish it. His grandfather reached out and gave his wrist a painful squeeze. Those old hands could crush walnuts. They could make paste out of his bones. Jonathan understood. It was as close to a hug as he'd ever get. It's going to be hard on the kids. They're good, you know. Don't know how they ever came out of that witch, but they did. I know, Jonathan told him. I'm not going to lock her out of their lives. I just can't get past what she did. For a year. Susan was tired, but feeling better about things. It had been over 3 months since her world had blown up. It had been hard. Torturous, to be honest. Things were getting better. The time on the ranch with the kids was good for them. Healing. Jonathan got home early for once. It was culling time, but the morning rains killed that. Uncle Lynn knew it was a big day for him, so he sent him on his way. He spotted the for sale sign on the front lawn. The house had gone to foreclosure. They had 30 days to vacate. Half the kids' stuff had already been moved into his grandfather's house, slowly, quietly. Rooms for when they stayed over on the weekend, they'd been told. He knew it would be hard. It shouldn't be. She was a lousy, cheating 304. But 11 years, 3 children, and a few months of repentance took the edge off some of the pain. Some. Not enough. He showered, dressed in his best shirt, clean jeans. He looked at his tan face in the mirror, trimmed his beard, and inspected himself. A new man looked back at him. A better man in many ways, but sadder. It wasn't what he'd ever wanted for his life. He went back to the living room, opened a bottle of her favorite wine, and poured 2 glasses. He placed them on the coffee table, the papers stacked neatly to the side. Jonathan adjusted their placement for the second time. She did this. Not me. He only had to remember her, the way she spoke to him that first night. Her great lover, who understood her, threatening him, walking out of their house and going to the scumsucker's bed, leaving him in that unbearable pain. What kind of evil selfish witch would do that? Remembering burned away any doubts he might have had. The door opened, and he stood nervously. Jonathan? Why is there a for sale sign on our house? Are we moving? He walked over, took her by the hand, and sat her down. Baby, he said, the word catching in his throat. There's something we have to talk about. She glanced down at the table, the 2 wine glasses, the stack of papers next to them. She looked at the papers again, her eyes finally recognizing the words. Original petition for divorce. She turned and looked into his eyes. Searching for sorrow or anger, she saw emptiness. Why? She asked, trembling. You cheated on me for a year, Susan. Insisted I accepted. I'm not made that way. I'm sorry. She could barely breathe, her hands shaking. But you said you loved me, that you forgave me. I do love you. I always will. You were my first true love, and the best wife a man could ask for 9 wonderful years. The mother of my beautiful children. A terrific mother. I do forgive you. Forgive you for all of it. But that's not enough. Please don't do this, Jonathan. You don't want a divorce. It will get ugly. I'll fight it every step of the way. I swear I will. I want my family. I don't want a divorce. It's done. Filed. The official process server will be here shortly to serve you. We have 30 days to leave the house. I'll take the kids to Grandpa's. He has the space for them, and you know they love the ranch. I won't keep you from them. We'll have joint custody, and you can see them all you want. No, you won't take my kids. I have rights. Where are you going to live with them? How are you going to take care of them? Here, I'll keep them here. I'm not going to let you sell my house. Never. It's not our house anymore. It's the bank's. It's in foreclosure. She stared at him in shock, trying to absorb his words. Foreclosure? How? I haven't paid the mortgage in 4 months. I don't make enough money anymore. But that's not possible. How come I didn't know? Because I didn't want you to. She understood then. It had been divorce all along. He never intended to give her a chance. It was all planned. How could you lead me on like this? For 4 months? Lying to me. How could you? I just had to remember the 2 years you lied to me. A year of going to another man's bed, giving him your love, your affection, making a mockery of our marriage. It was pretty easy, really. She felt the anger growing. I'm still their mother. The courts will give them to me. You know they will. I'll make your life hell, Jonathan. You'll never see them if you do this. I swear you won't. Where will you live? How will you take care of them? He asked softly. I guess I'll go back to Rich. He'll take me in. He loves me. She knew there wasn't much chance of that. He'd cut off all communications. Still, once she explained. You don't know? Jonathan asked, concern on his face. Know what? Rich is dead. Suicide. Sleeping pill overdose. Susan heard the words, fighting hard not to believe them. Deep down she knew it was true. Without her, he would have slipped back into his depression. She remembered how he was after she left him the first time. It wasn't her fault. She tried to talk to him. See him. He's the one that cut her off. She tried. She went to see him. She did. She never wanted to end it like they had, going silent like that. Oh, God. Was he dead? Even then? How long? Why? Was it just her leaving? Did he get the treatment she had? Oh no, he couldn't have survived that. Not in a million years. He wasn't strong enough. Not without her by his side. Maybe it was a lie. That was it. Jonathan was lying to her, trying to hurt her, like she'd hurt him. It had to be a lie, didn't it? He couldn't be dead. Not Rich. Jonathan held her, waiting for the shakes to stop. The glazed look in her eye, the unresponsiveness. Susan, he kept repeating softly. Susan. Eventually her breathing calmed, and he felt her lean into him. She started crying, softly, then harder. He pulled her close, holding her. He is dead, isn't he? She finally breathed. 5 days now. I'm sorry, I thought you knew. What am I going to do now? She whined pitifully. I imagine your parents will take you in, at least temporarily. You have your job, you're still a beautiful woman. You'll find somebody, someone who CA accept what I couldn't. You can see the kids all you want. I want them with me, she said. I know. Your parents don't have the space. I don't know how you're going to afford a big enough house for the 4 of you. You don't want them living 3 to a room, do you? She shook her head. Grandpa has plenty of space. Miguel's niece will take care of the house and watch the kids when I'm not around. Grandpa's not happy with you, but he's agreed to allow you free access to the house and the kids. You could help me. Child support and alimony will make it possible. I earn less than 20 grand a year now. I could pay maybe $500. It won't be enough. They have the run of a huge house, 10,000 acres of backyard. They won't want for anything. Grandpa has a lot of money. He's crazy about them. What can you offer them? They're my children, she sobbed. Yes, they are, and they still will be. Why can't we go back to the way things were, Jonathan? We love each other. Things have been so good the last couple of months. I made a mistake. Don't punish me forever. I never meant for it to happen. I'm sorry. I could never trust you again. I'd always be wondering when you were going to fall into someone else's bed. Come home to me, stinking of sex, another man's seed filling you. I can't do it. I don't want to. I'm moving on now, and it's time for you to, as well. I can't. I know I can't. I'll die without my family. No reason to live. I hope you don't. It would be hard on the children. The children? Don't you care? Of course I do. Unfortunately, that's not enough. Your cheating was too thorough, too complete. You destroyed me. She shook, hearing the condemnation in his words. And now you're going to destroy me. Yes. She tried to fight it, but she didn't have the heart for it. She was broken. Her parents sided with her, angry at Jonathan for denying her the children. Over a long, painful dinner, he managed to make it clear to them they could see the kids whenever they wanted. Susan could have unlimited access to them. When she pulled herself together, if she had the space for them, they would work out shared custody. Dinner was at his grandfather's house, and it was obvious the kids were happy there. 3 new puppies kept them entertained. Cindy was riding every day and insisted in showing her grandparents her new horse. Joey was proud as could be, wearing what the ranch hands wore, his boots dusty, his small Stetson dirty and curled on the sides of the brim. Nancy sat in her great-grandfather's lap, happy as a clam while he read to her, giving them time to talk. She had him wrapped around her little finger, and everybody knew it. The crotchety old man had finally met his match. They were home, happy. She couldn't take that from them. She signed the papers and moved forward with her sad, squalid life. There was no alimony. She made as much money as he did. On paper, he didn't ask for child support and offered joint custody with him as the primary caregiver. They had virtually nothing to split, except for a few pieces of furniture that Jonathan kept in back for whenever she wanted them. At the end, he gave her a check for half of their equity, $1,120. 11 years, $112 a year. Susan lost her job at Jenkins Hardware the week after the divorce was final. Times were tight, she was told, and she was one of the newest hires. She laid at home in her childhood bed, wondering at what had happened to her life. She had it all. Now she had nothing. Absolutely nothing. Jonathan looked down at the beautiful red hair, cascading over his crotch. Dean wasn't the most talented. He'd have to credit Gina with that. But you had to give her an A for effort. She certainly was willing. He was more than hard enough, as he lifted her bodily into the air, giving her a quick kiss on the lips and laying her down on the bed. His previous effort had yielded 2 pretty spectacular orgasms, but he wasn't done with the little fire crotch yet. Screw me. Already, you beast, she laughed, squirming, trying to pull him up the bed. Jesus, Jonathan, how did she ever give this up? The young beauty asked. He put the thought out of his mind. The first 6 months, that would have had him wilting and feeling sorry for himself. Not any longer. He knew she was offering to stay over, but he wasn't ready for that. She was pretty as a picture, but she drank too much and didn't seem like the nurturing type. And that temper, not the best mother material. Not like Katie, sweet Katie, the most loving of all of them so far. If only she could have kept her trap shut every once in a while. Susan met with her grandmother. They sat in the parlor and had tea together. You look terrible, dear, Grandma Bridget said. I know, Susan answered softly, unable to meet her grandmother's eyes. She remembered the harsh words, condemning, insulting her. Her grandfather still wouldn't acknowledge she was alive. It's been over a year, Susan. You've got to let it go. Move on with your life. You're still young, barely 30. 35, Grandma. The old woman laughed. A baby? God, what I wouldn't give to be 35 again. Want to trade places? No, dear. Not in a million years. I could never do that to your grandfather. He deserves better. Am I that terrible? No, honey. You did a terrible thing. You can get past that. She took a sip of her tea. Did you just come over for a visit? Or did you want something? Susan looked up at the older woman. 56 years of marriage. She might have the answers. I want him back, Grandma. I know he's lonely. He dates, but never for long. I see the way he looks at me at Sunday dinner. We were perfect together. I was an idiot. I threw it all away. I want him back. I want my family back. That's a lot to ask, sweetie. You done him wrong. Very wrong. A man has his pride, and you did your best to destroy his. I know. I'll do whatever I have to. Do you think it's possible? Am I just dreaming? The older woman sat back, looking at her daughter's child. Broken. She was broken, not even a shadow of the happy girl she was once. Still, 35 years old, pretty if she wanted to be, nice figure. She'd made him love her once. She'd paid the price, and maybe she'd learned. Just maybe. It's going to be difficult, you know, getting him to fall back in love with you. Susan perked up at the words. Difficult, but not impossible. Whatever it takes, Grandma. I swear, there's nothing I won't do. Just tell me what I have to do. Anything. Please. Bridget looked up at the mantel, at the picture of her with her 4 best friends. Cheerleaders, all those years ago. The most popular girls in school. The original Fab Five. All married now, Emma celebrating her 50th anniversary last month. Josephine on her second husband, 10 years now. May Darren rest in peace. Her Jimmy was a good man, but that Darren, he'd been special. Amazing. Thank God, he'd gone to the grave keeping her secret. She still felt shame for that lost weekend. Shame and excitement. 55 years after high school, and the 5 of them were still the best of friends. Still turned heads. What they didn't know about men wouldn't fill a teacup. Let me make a few calls. We have a lot of work ahead of us, you understand? Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.